Thank you, one and all. Hello, and officially welcome to the Reset Show, episode number 5. Summer has slipped away and autumn has arrived, and of course COVID continues to cast a cloud over our daily lives. So thank goodness for our guest today, the leadership consultant, coach, writer, and all-round absolutely lovely human being, Helena Clayton. So hello to you, Helena. Thanks for joining our People Lab Love Shack today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So we'll be talking to Helena more in a moment. Just to introduce my co-travelers on the Love Train are, of course, Belinda from Fathom XP, Emma and Katie from People Lab, and myself, Justin McCarran from Everyday Resilience, as well as the people who are joining the call live. And of course, if you're watching this recording on YouTube or listening on our, check it out, our new podcast, which you can download from all the main platforms such as iTunes, Amazon, or Spotify. Other platforms are available. That's the introduction. Welcome, thank you, and over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Justin. So for those of you that are new to the Reset Show, we created this as a space and a place where we can come together to talk about, share ideas, share, what we're up to in terms of the way the world of work is changing. So we are 6 months into the pandemic now, and it's an ever-moving feast, and we're kind of getting into this adapt and renew phase. So we kind of reacted, and we're looking now at how we can really use this as an opportunity to make the world of work better for all of us. So it's a unique opportunity to improve the way we both live and work. Absolutely delighted to have Helena join us today. So thank you, Helena. And Helena's going to talk about the role of love in the workplace, which we're really interested in. It's such a kind of a new area and a really super interesting area. And B, I know that you obviously have a connection with Helena. So I'm going to hand over to you to get the conversation started.
Thank you. Yeah, Helena and I were just briefly talking about this before. I think it's coming up to possibly 10 years ago that I met Helena when I did a residential course at the Management Training Centre, Roffey Park, and it was a course on facilitation, advanced facilitation techniques. And it was quite unlike anything I had ever experienced before. It was just wonderful. It opened up a whole new way of thinking about people and working with people and what that actually means. So it took me in a completely different place. And I think Hannah and I have since bumped into each other probably once a year at Meaning Conference, which is a fantastic annual conference in Brighton about better business. So we stayed in touch that way. So I'm so happy to be having this conversation with Helena. I've followed your work. So the more formal introduction for people that haven't met Helena before. So leadership consultant, 25 years experience, designing and running innovative leadership and development programs. So a coach, thinking partner and critical friend for leaders. I'd love to explore more about that. And also really increasingly well known for your really innovative work, researching, writing and speaking about the role that love could or in fact should play within organisations and beyond. And I know that you've got some new stuff coming out that you're launching this month on that, so we'd love to talk a bit more about that. Before we get into the depths of the work and what it means, how on earth did you get started with this?
Yeah, thank you, Belinda, and really good to be here. Let me see if I can kind of shorten it. So yeah, 25 years in leadership development, but also 25 years roughly in parallel in kind of personal growth work. So in my 20s, I started working with a therapist and realized, oh, flip, there was a whole thing called inner work. So through my 20s and 30s, 40s, I'm 56 now, I've always kept that thread going. And for the last sort of 10 years, most of it has been through experiential, quite immersive, often quite cutting edge, personal growth workshops, all of which have a spiritual heart, I guess. And what I kept seeing there was that when people were struggling with something, where there was pain, there was suffering, people were carrying loads of stuff around with them that was really getting in their way, there was trouble. When that was met with love, healing took place. It was just that simple. It's like meet anything with love and something shifts, something happens. Mm-hmm. So I was seeing that. Then in my work strand, I was seeing organizations that some were loving, most were at best kind of full of benign neglect and thoughtlessness, and at worst were kind of harsh and very unloving. And I was trying to make sense of these two worlds really, because it was the same people who would pitch up on one of these weekends who would then put on a suit and be part of that corporate culture. You know, it's the same. So that just got me thinking, wow, if we are really hardwired for love, which I think we are, how come it's just not available or let in or talked about or part of the thing in organizational life? So that's the shortest version, I think, of what got me started to get interested in this. Yeah.
Fascinating. And I know, and in your report, and we were just talking about it before, that, you know, that it actually hasn't been an easy task to necessarily pursue that in a straight line, and that you've had lots of people, I don't want to say throwing you off course if that's quite the right language, but tell me about that bit of the journey and about how you've had to sort of stay strong on focus on love.
Well, I've been looking at this now for maybe 3 or 4 years, but maybe 2 or 3 years. But prior to that, a couple of years before, I'd started I said to a group of people, oh, I'm going to start researching love. And I know this sounds a bit dramatic, but I was slightly shamed for it. I know nobody can make me feel, but I was made to feel a bit ridiculous for doing it. And I let myself get small. I let myself think, oh, what a stupid idea. That's right. You know, that's just daft. So I put it away in a drawer. And then it never quite went away. And then 3 or 4 years later, it came back again. And one, maybe I was stronger in myself and bolder, more courageous, more of a effort, you know, kind of attitude. But also I think maybe the times had changed as well. And there was a bit more curiosity around. And of course, even now, things have shifted with COVID, because I think the door's been, you know, bust open. So I think the time is certainly right now for conversations like this.
Amazing. So tell us what does love bring to organizations? What can it offer to organizations?
So in 2018, I did a piece of online research, and I asked a version of exactly that, you know, with more love, what could be possible here? And the responses were in kind of 3 chunks, really. One was about self. People said, with more love, you know, I would shine more brightly. I'd be a better version of myself. You know, so there was a really clear sense that I would just be a better me. And if I'm a better me, I can be more and do more. The second one was, linked to that one actually was, and I would feel safe. With more love, I would feel safe. And when I feel safe, then I don't have to waste energy making myself feel safe. I can use that energy on, you know, taking more risks and experimenting. So there was something about, I feel safe, which was really lovely and big. Another stream was around, we'd collaborate more. There was more love around here. We'd fight less, we'd compete less. We'd be less fearful of each other. So there'd be much more collaboration. And then the kind of final chunk was, and with more collaboration, then we can really start to solve the big intractable problems. So people talked about more creativity and more innovation. And they talked about it would be infectious, you know, it would be contagious. When there was more love, it would just spread. So yeah, it was beautiful actually, and very rich.
Amazing. So interesting to hear. Justin's our resident resilience coach. That's quite difficult to say, resident resilience.
Resident resilience coach.
What's coming up for you? Just these ideas around being able to shine more brightly. What a beautiful thought. And safety and being bigger.
I think, you know, in some ways, for me, my approach to resilience is always to try and swap a different word for it anyway, because resilience has got so many different meanings. In itself, it has a meaning in a kind of scientific sense in terms of the resilience of an object, you know, elasticity and all of that. And that doesn't really apply to human beings. So I remember I read a lovely book by Eric Greitens I've mentioned before called about resilience, and he just talks about this notion of bouncing back. He's like, well, where are you bouncing back from and to? He's like, that's just that, you know, we're not on this linear path. You know, we're in this constantly evolving present moment. So you can't. It's sort of that. It doesn't apply to us anyway. Sorry. You asked me a very lovely question. And I think for me, what you're saying, Helena, rings a lot of bells for me, is when you really start to dig into businesses and ask them, what would having more, when I ask people, what would having more resilience give you? It's the same answers. And that sense of safety comes up really, really powerfully. So when, you know, when we feel safe and we feel connected and we feel supported and we're not alone, we can relax, we can let our guard down, we can trust in our ability to connect and create, which, as you've also said, we can allow the things that we are hardwired to do happen naturally. And it's more about getting out of the way of that than doing anything differently. But for some reason, as you were saying, Helena, the minute we cross that threshold and walk into work, we enter a different world somehow. And yet when you talk to people, you say, well, but you're you outside the door. Well, when we used to walk in through a door, and now you're you inside. So what has changed? And yet somehow these unwritten rules apply. And that's what I find fascinating about what you were saying about when you talk to people. It's natural, of course. Yes, we'd get this and we get that, and it would be amazing. And you go, okay, well, what's stopping you? And what's stopping us is, first of all, we can't even have the conversation about what. Helena, what do you think is behind our inability to actually talk about love?
You know, and you know, it's a great question. And the image that was coming to mind as you were talking about, it's quite innate. One of the big pieces of development I did, and I did the teacher training, was something called the Hoffman process, a really deep dive, fabulous process. And they talk about sort of human nature and love and all our innate qualities. And they describe it as a spring, you know, bubbling up from the ground, pure, natural, just, you know, beautiful, natural, clean, fresh, pure spring. But somebody's chucked crisp packets in there, they've chucked an old Tesco shopping trolley, and then it's got clogged up with algae, and then somebody else has put some empty cans of Tennants, and, you know, and some old bags. It's just all silted up. So what you were saying there, Justin, reminded me, it's almost like our work is to just kind of clear away some of that stuff. So who we are can, you know, bubble up. Yeah, it's just like, how do we get out of our own way in a way? How do we clear away all the stuff that we've just, I don't know, become socialized to do that isn't.
Yeah, I wonder what's changing then in our relationship with how we think about the world of work and our personal life, because of course now for lots of us, I know this isn't true for everyone, but for those of us on the call and who are working from home, that door doesn't exist anymore. Now it's a metaphorical door, whereas before it was a literal door. So you would get to your place of work, you would have that transition phase from I'm at home, now I'm at work. But now that transition is invisible. You're literally 1 second you're sitting having your breakfast, the next second you spin your camera around and hi, you're at work. So I'm wondering whether what journey people are going to be going on with that, and whether it will be easier for us to have a gentler, more personal, more intimate conversation, I suppose, about love and the role it plays for us in our lives and the role it plays for us in our work relationships.
I really, really flipping hope so, because what I'm seeing, you know, of people's lives now is overwhelm and this intense compression where, you know, everything is just squeezed and compressed. And I don't think, you know, geologically, right, compression creates diamonds. I don't think it does in this case at all. It has a completely different effect. But I think one of the things that I often find interesting when I coach, and I say to people, either what is it that you want, or in this, what is it that you need? How difficult that is for many people to answer. So often the answer is, oh, man, I don't know. And one of the things I think I'm seeing as a result of these last 6 months is people getting a bit more of a clearer sense of what they want and need. You know, a number of people have said to me, I don't want things to go back as they were before, because what's become clear to me is what really matters to me, and what really matters to me is X. I'm seeing a lot of that in everything else as well. So I am really hoping that one of the things that comes out of this is allowing us to connect with, yeah, what really matters to us, who we really are. I hope so.
I absolutely hope so too. Yeah, and I wonder that maybe this is going to be one of the things we look back and go, oh, well, you know, that happened because of the situation we were all thrown into. That and talk about doors again, that opened the door to this conversation, because suddenly we were real people with real lives, with kids in the background, with, you know, unfinished painting on the half-painted kitchen cupboards, with, you know, whatever else was going on. Suddenly it's almost like the mask had dropped, the veneer that we put on with the suit you were talking about, Helena, like that wasn't there anymore. And so suddenly everything started to slip, and that's hopefully an exciting conversation to start to have. Emma and Belinda, what would you like to add or ask at this stage before we hand it over to our colleagues on the call?
A great comment here from Laura. Thank you, Laura, saying there's a real danger of snap, and we need to help our organisations realise it's not going back. The door's been opened, and I think that completely agree with that. And I guess just got so many things whizzing around in my head, so I'm going to try and make sense of this. But as I said before, there's this real golden opportunity to really do something differently. And I completely agree with you. I've been fascinated for years around this whole idea that when you cross the door, the actual door at work, you become a different person, you behave in a different way. And going back to kind of, you know, the coaching side, the psychology side, you know, we know what happens to human beings if they live a life without love. It's not pretty. And there's a whole load of experiments that we can share with you on that. It's not pretty. Nobody would want to go through their lives without experiencing love in its many different facets and forms. So why on earth would we not want that in the workplace? But it's such a new and novel idea. And Helena, I was fascinated by your research, and Justice touched on this around, you know, how people are very uncomfortable with talking about love at work. Even saying the idea of being, you know, let's create a culture where we experience love is like, oh, not sure about that. So I'm really interested in how we start to change that narrative, how we start to have these conversations, because again, from a neuroscientific point of view, the evidence is clear. When we experience love, it releases positive emotions, all those wonderful neurotransmitters, and it releases a whole load of brilliant outcomes for both us and our businesses. So why wouldn't we? And yet, the minute you talk about it, people kind of go, and Justin's touched on this, but how do we go about changing the narrative? How do we go about having these conversations?
Right. Oh man, there's so many questions in that.
Sorry.
And so I heard somebody say the other day, we don't have to love people in work, but we do have to act with love. And it's like, that's a difference. You know, I don't have to love everybody, although we could debate that one as well, but I do have to act with love. So that's one thing. Another aspect of this, I think, is honoring the reasons why love may not be in some ways right or suitable or fitting for an organization. So the actor Kenneth Williams was quoted as saying, "Love is the most awful invasion of privacy." And it's like, oh man, it is, you know. So there is legitimately, I think, if we think of, you know, the origin of work, you know, work hasn't been around that long actually, historically. You know, it was very much separate from our personal lives. So I can understand that for many of us, it's like, you're getting 10 hours or 8 hours or however many, 14 hours of me. I'm giving you all those hours. I'm giving you all of my head. You're not getting my heart, you know. So it's like, I have to keep something for myself. I give you so much, I have to keep something. But so that, I also want to honor that, because it's not it would be oppressive to insist that, you know, we had to bring love into the workplace in some ways. Because the other thing I've been really interested about is this idea of what's called slow trauma or adverse childhood experiences. And what we're learning is that for between 40 and 60% of us as adults, as a child, we experienced some form of ACE, adverse childhood experiences or slow trauma, which could be as everyday, if you like, as poverty or economic hardship, parental divorce, through to things like being in a family system with violence or alcoholism, abuse, and then of course being abused. So if you imagine that, so the theory goes that a whole organization of adults, 40 to 60% of us, are walking around with the wounds left over from those childhood experiences. And that then does something to our ability to connect with some emotions, including love. So there is also some really interesting things to explore around trauma and the ways we have found to protect ourselves. One of which is to separate ourselves off from certain of our inner parts, if you like, or our emotions. There's a great paper, I'll send it to you so you can sit around, on how organizational change re-triggers childhood trauma. So it's like this paper was saying, no wonder we get the responses we do to organizational change, because actually it's re-triggering old stuff that we've never ever processed. Sorry, it's a very, very long answer. I haven't begun to talk about how do we begin conversations.
Yeah, that is absolutely fascinating. No wonder pretty much 80% of change initiatives fail, because that's big resistance you're going to be, that's unconscious resistance, isn't it, that you're going to be dealing with. We had a lovely question, which Debbie, well done, you beat me to it. Katie, do you want to read out the question in the chat from Debbie for Helena?
Yeah, of course. So Debbie asks, can you share how you define love in the work context as opposed to romantic love or familiar love?
Yeah, lovely. So when I started the research, I intentionally didn't provide a definition. I wanted people to come at the word from the ground up, if you like. So I'll share what the research showed in a tick. And I'm definitely all about finding a way to define love, or describe love anyway, that is free from, or as separate as we can from, religious, romantic, sentimental associations, because they're not super helpful in the workplace. So I'm after a kind of a secular, robust take on it. But what the research came up with was overwhelmingly people used the word care to define love. And in that kind of bucket was nurture, compassion, empathy. So care, nurture, compassion, empathy. That was overwhelmingly the strongest theme, if you like. What came a strong second, I'm going to get the order of these wrong, but this was the second, was listening. Undivided, focused, dedicated, wholehearted, present listening. It's like not, fiddling with, not taking the washing out, not, typing another email, open, present listening, full attention. That was seen as love. And once we start to think, if that's how people see love, then it's easier for leaders to say, oh, I can learn how to do that. It becomes less of an amorphous, this love thing, and oh, I can do that. So there was care, there was listening, there was acceptance, something about accepting people for all of who they are, the shitty parts, the bad behavior, the awkwardness, the warts and all. And I've since written, the need for radical acceptance, actually, because I know that I have to overcome quite a lot in myself to accept, other people and myself, actually. So acceptance was a big part, but then also something about boundaries, that love wasn't only the kind of welcoming, inviting part, but it was also the ability to, well, in organizational terms, give tough feedback, say no, say that's not okay. And again, I've gone on to write about how if we extend that, anger is also a legitimate part of love, to really know what matters to you so that you're willing to stand and fiercely protect it and fight for it. So you can see that, that there's quite a bandwidth, if you like, in love. Yeah. Hope that helps, Debbie. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that definition radical acceptance was a really powerful way of combining those two aspects of love, if you like, and you know how the generosity that comes with acceptance is also tempered by that radical quality of holding to account, that sense of, you know, of fierce love as well. It's not, you know, it's not soft and lovely and warm. It's hard. Belinda, I'm thinking we talked about this the other week, didn't we? About the sort of the power of love, without wishing to coin a phrase.
Yes, it's this, because the conversation we're having is very different from the images that are conjured up when we think about love. You know, it's fluffy, soft, warm, fuzzy. And actually what we're talking about is incredibly strong and robust. I think that's stating the obvious, but I'm wondering, in terms of the conversations around love, how we work with that tension between the image that people have and actually the reality of what it is that we're trying to bring to life.
Yeah. I run a session, a workshop. I don't know how it went in the olden days when those things were around, and I put up a slide that has these kind of clusters of definition words. And initially, when I first sort of pulled those out of the research, I wasn't sure what value it would add. But what I noticed is when I show that list, and again, if somebody can make a note, I'll make sure I share that. This kind of deconstruction of love, as per my research respondents, the number of people who said, oh my word, that is so useful, because now I can see it deconstructed. I can see that it is doable and actionable, and I do that, but I could do more of that. And it's almost like it lays out a syllabus. It's not quite right, but you know, a kind of a laundry list of ways that we can be loving. And in ways that sort of encompass the many dimensionalness of it.
Yeah. Something I was just thinking that came to mind, and I'm sure this will be obvious to you, Helena, when you're talking about the radical acceptance and also taking the kind of very abstract concept of love and breaking it down, is the role of diversity and inclusion. That's like hot news at the moment, and we know from all the research that companies that get this right, you know, it's really good for everybody that works there, for business, for customers. And inclusion, genuine inclusion, is really about that radical acceptance, isn't it? And so I think that's something in there that I think, going back to kind of putting my more commercial hat on, thinking about the sorts of companies that I might work with, say companies that got lots of engineers in, just thinking about how I could start to have these sorts of conversations with them. I think using the D&I agenda as a starting point could be really helpful. I was thinking that through as you were talking. I don't know what everybody else thinks about that, but that could be a good starting point. I don't know if you've ever, I have read the research and it's fantastic, and we'll share it afterwards, but the links to the D&I piece, have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I'd love others' thoughts on that, actually. Where what I've been pondering lately, actually, is just the deep inner honesty that's needed from each of us to really do that work, to really uncover and be brave enough to name our unconscious biases, really, is massive, massive work, let alone then the structural work that needs to be done. You know, there's somebody who's been in my life for a few years who is here to teach me to be generous and kind and to be loving, actually, because from a small D&I, her thinking and her ways of seeing the world are so different to mine, and I don't agree with them and I don't like them, and yet our lives are inextricably linked. So I'm finding it really, really hard to get over my own assumptions and biases and judgments. And even in that tiny example, I'm really noticing how much is there for me to do some work, because I'm seeing parts of myself that I don't like, you know, the parts of me that are judgmental and mean and withholding and cold. You know, so So yeah, and I'd love to hear more. It's not an angle that I've dived into, but yeah, where might other people's thinking go around the links between love and diversity and inclusion? It's a great inquiry.
It's great. Yeah, no, I just something really resonated with me when you were talking then, and kind of going slightly off tack, but I think it's all linked, is the increasing prevalence of people, friends on social media, who say, if you think this, I will unfriend you. And I have an absolute policy not to do that. And like you say, there are people who share some stuff and I'm like, oh, you know, and I absolutely have to make myself think, no, I'm going to keep talking to you because I want to kind of show you love. Not that I think of it in that way, but, you know, try and understand where you're coming from. Because I know you're not a bad person, because you wouldn't be my friend if you were, you know. So that's, I think that's a really, really good point. And I wonder if social media doesn't really help, does it, in terms of the D&I piece, because it means we can surround ourselves in our echo chamber. We can choose the voices we want to hear, so it's not massively helpful. So sorry, slightly off track there, but yeah, D&I piece. Any thoughts, being Justin, on that, or anything else that you wanted to pick up?
Well, my thoughts are getting drawn in a slightly different direction, actually, away from D&I. B, did you have anything you wanted to jump in with?
Yes, lots, and nothing well formed. I was listening to, and I'll put a link in it, I'll check on my phone from a podcast this morning. Sandy, he's from Harvard, and his research into social inclusion and connections across groups and networks. And his research and just was fascinating on this. There's actually, it's what we know, is that more diverse a group is, the better it performs, and we know that. But his use of big data, looking at this, was looking at actual, he's saying you can, looking at mobile phone data and how people connect and go into different communities within a borough of London, and how they connect and who they speak to outside of their usual group or bubble or network or whatever, you know, narrow group you want to put them in. The more connections outside of a group you have, the higher the correlation for greater economic growth, health, well-being, the number of startup businesses, everything, even to the point where he was saying that with big data, you can actually predict higher infant mortality rate in districts of London where there is less social integration between groups. And this is all, so this is related. It's like, I suppose I said it's ill-formed, but I'm really curious about love. It's a D&I conversation. It's about love as a bridge. As you know, we all stick in our bubbles, you know, whether it's generational, class, geography, ethnicity, whatever it is, we stick in our bubbles. So how can love help bridge those gaps?
Really, really lovely, really lovely. And where I go to is, for me, and this is such a simplistic way of describing it, but you know, it's the opposite of love isn't hate, it's fear. You know, and then I go to this thing about fear. Well, we know this kind of with cortisol in our brains and stress, we can't think anything other than laser focus, right? We can only see this tiny bit in front of us. So fear makes us small and it contracts us and we shrink. Whereas love is about expansion, right? So love is about, as you were saying, and I think, you know, understanding the other person's story, what's happened to them that makes them respond like this, you know, or being curious about the bigger picture. But likewise, I think the more we can connect to other people, you know, this thing about, you know, the biggest picture, what does the world need? What is their view over there? So the more we can expand in all directions, for me, that's what love is. And I think our work is often to stop ourselves contracting, because I know for me, it's quite easy for me to shrink in and pull up the drawbridge. But I think the invitation from love is to not do that, which is flipping hard at times. So yeah, I think there's something in that, Belinda, about, you know, reaching out and making connections and being actively curious. I think, you know, love is an intentional choice, and expansion is an intentional choice that we have to, I know I do have to keep front of mind the whole time. But being curious about what is their view, what is their life, you know, what do they want and need, how are they the same or different from me?
Fascinating. Just, yeah, I love that.
Thank you so much for this. We have another comment from this one from Laura. Laura, would you like to unmute and ask the question directly to Helena? But the reason I'm asking is because I'm not quite sure. It might need a little bit of clarification. Is that right? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, totally terrified. Okay. Well, hello. And it was actually also picking up on what Belinda was saying, where from the sort of community aspect and being able to track people. And it's just something that's been playing on my mind for a while, is about, with being more virtual, you are more intentional in your interactions. You know, you have those very precise and specific times when you meet people. You're not bumping in, you know, none of the water cooler moments, none of the interactions on the train or the bus, which are some of my greatest conversations, those unintentional sort of interactions. But it means that you're actually getting less other input and other perceptions. And I mean, one of the reasons for coming along to this event and so on is to make sure that I sort of widen my network and get different perceptions, or just sort of check my own as well. So sorry, that was the meaning behind the statement. It wasn't in one way so much of a question. So and sorry if it sounded a bit rambling, but that was the connection that this has all made really for me. It is about that intentional piece, that we need to try and make sure that we're listening to the others, the people that aren't in the room, and how can we actually make sure that we're doing that, and doing it with love if they're not necessarily in our orbit normally.
Yeah. Wow, what a great question. Who wants to answer that one? That's you know, this is the nature of the conversation. Thanks, Laura, and apologies for picking on you, but I thought you'd cope fine, and you did. This is the nature of the conversation, Helena. The question you asked before we came on air, so to speak, was, you know, how did this come about and why the 4 hosts? And it's for exactly that. It's because that can happen. Where someone who's our participant on the call can ask a question that totally stumps us. Totally stumps us all, because that's the nature of the conversation we're going through. We don't know. I mean, my default answer for these is always, well, I look forward to seeing how we do it as humans, because this is what we've always done. We find a way to get what we need from other people, despite the seeming obstacles. We will just find that way, because as you talk about, Helena, we are hardwired to do that. We need each other. We need to connect. So despite the restrictions that are being put on our ability to connect in the normal ways at the moment, we will evolve to find those methods. But I mean, you know, on one hand you might say, well, that's just dodging the question, and you'd be right, because I don't know. I don't think any of us know yet. Is my response. B and Helena and Emma.
Yeah, well, just to one of those things, Laura, you know, tomorrow, Thursday, there's a conference tomorrow, an OD conference, and I'm running a session in the afternoon, and I've built it as an experimental session because I don't know either. It's about, can we create loving connections online with people we've never met before? I have a hunch, I think we can, and I've set up a kind of set of online experiences in breakouts and in plenary, and then we'll talk about, did that, you know, what did that do? Was any more love generated? I don't know, because I think especially because we're online more, those tiny moments of, you know, oh, passing somebody saying, oh, I love that skirt you're wearing, you know, thank you, you know, they're just not there. And I do think we need to put them front of mind, because we lose so much around intimate connection. And those kind of love your skirt moments are moments of intimacy, and they matter. So thank you. That's a beautiful comment.
Oh, I'm just desperate to know how that goes. So, I'm not the right word. So keen to know how that goes. I keep coming back to this metaphor that I think occurred to me right at the beginning of this, which is, it's like I think how we're living now and working now is like constantly driving round and round the M25. and never getting off, versus taking a Sunday afternoon bike ride to the pub and going to see a friend. It's like we're just in one lane, and there is no opportunity for, I like your new skirt, as you say, and those are the moments of human connection that enable a different conversation to happen, and we need to find a way to build those in and get off the M25.
We so do. That's so beautifully put.
We are
just a slight different perspective on that. I think in some ways I've developed more of a connection with some of the people I've worked with since we've been online. Yeah. We're having different conversations. We're in each other's homes. I'm not today, I'm in my office today, and I might not be saying I like your skirt, but I'm going, oh, I love that picture. Or and I, there's a story that I've told Helena, which everyone has heard of on the call probably, is when I was doing a workshop with about 60 people at Starbucks, and my youngest son came bounding in and gave me a big massive hug from behind and said, "What are you doing, Mama?" And previous to what we're going through now, I'd have been mortified, and obviously it was acceptable. I said, "Oh, I'm just speaking to the lovely people at Starbucks." I said, "Oh, this is Teddy, my son." They went, "Hi, Teddy." And he said, "Oh, hi." We had a little bit of a chat. He said, "I'll see you later." And that definitely helped release more feelings of, I don't know if it's love, but connection and authenticity, and compassion as well. Than before, I would have been mortified. I would have kicked him out of the way and gone, "Shh, I'm on a call," So it's that kind of, so I think in some ways, absolutely, he doesn't want to have a hug and be in person with someone. And I'm an extrovert. I'm struggling with lockdown, but in some ways, I think that I've definitely developed more of a connection with people online. So just a different perspective for you.
Yeah.
I think that came through as well when we did some work with some clients talking about their experiences during lockdown. It was a bit like of a networking session because they hadn't been together, they hadn't had their usual team away day, and they had said that actually they felt close to their team, and one of them found out that someone in their team had kids, didn't even know that they'd had kids previously because it had never come up in conversation, so they were getting to know each other much better.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I think there's a real distinction between the people who are doing back-to-back, almost like the internal consultant within an organisation doing back-to-back Zoom meetings, which are totally M25, versus the people who are working in a team, or I don't know, it's different, I suppose, obvious, isn't it? Different experiences. Yeah. And before I hand back to Justin to wrap up, Helen, I've got one question for you. I'm really intrigued. I know that you've got a new Love and Leadership programme that's about to start. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'd assumed that I'd do more researching, I'd do more speaking, and I'd probably develop an offering, a kind of program, I don't know, sometime next year. And then, of course, everything got cancelled in the summer. So, and then online was available. And I thought, actually, why don't I develop a small offering now? So that was a great opportunity. It's my lockdown baby. So on last Friday, I began a 6-week online Leading from Love program. So 6 Fridays, just 90 minutes, exploring these kind of questions. Why does love matter? How do we start to talk about it in organizations? What kind of business case, inverted commas, do we need to make for it? What blocks love in organizations? What enables it? And with the view to this being a bit of an action research program, we'll talk about it and explore it for ourselves, but also people will do things in their organization to just create ripples. So for example, I've given everybody 6 copies of my research report, and I'm saying once a week, post one of these to somebody and say, I read this. I thought that was interesting. You don't have to be an advocate for it. You can just say, I'd love your views. So, you're just starting conversations about love in organizations, seeding, the word love with people who wouldn't ordinarily use the word. So, so it's just off week 1, just off the starting blocks, but I'll probably run another one this side of Christmas, I hope. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to developing it into something more and bigger next year as well. So yeah.
So great to hear that that's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. And how can people find out about the course that's going to be starting, the second course, and how can they keep up with your research? What's the best platform for them to follow you?
Find me on LinkedIn, so Helena Clayton, just come and connect with me, that would be lovely. If you're on Twitter, I post stuff there, so at Helena Clayton. But I guess the easiest way is to sign up for my newsletter. So I do a monthly newsletter, which usually has a main blog and then some other bits and pieces. And you can get there via my website, I guess. So that's just helenaclayton.co.uk. That's probably the simplest way to keep in touch, but LinkedIn and Twitter also fantastic.
I'll make sure that I add the link to all of that in the comms that go out to everybody afterwards that's signed up via Eventbrite as well. So if you've subscribed via Eventbrite, we always send an email out afterwards with the recording and some extra resources. So that'll be on its way to you all too.
Great, thanks, Katie.
Perfect cue, Katie, for me to remind people that you, of course, you're very welcome if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to it following the live recording on the podcast. But of course, if you sign up, you get all the goodies that go with it. You get a goodie bag. Goodie bags will be arriving in your email inbox over the coming weeks. And of course, the conversation evolves alongside the Reset Show. We are developing a particular, we're calling it we're still working title is the Reset Lab. So we're deepening this conversation, taking this offline and having a deeper conversation, taking a more in-depth look at the topic as it evolves. Because as we've covered, this is about asking questions rather than finding answers at this stage. Helena, thank you so much from all of us, from the four of us rather, and of course from everyone who's watching, whether they're watching live or on YouTube. It's been genuinely an utter delight to talk to you. And on a personal note, I know it's been a particularly difficult day for you, so thank you for joining us. And would you please come back and tell us when you find some answers?
I would definitely love to. This research is ongoing and I would love to share more of it as it evolves. So yeah, I'd be delighted. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to do what we call in the trade a hospital pass and ask Belinda to give us a one-line summary of who is coming up as our guest on the show number 6, which is happening in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you very much. So 2 weeks' time, October the 7th, we have Heather McGowan, who is an internationally recognised keynote speaker on the future of work and the future of learning. She's got a fabulous book out at the moment called The Adaptation Advantage, which I thoroughly recommend reading. And yeah, absolutely delighted that she's going to be joining us. And you can sign up, as Justin said, on Eventbrite for that. So you get all the goodies and the reminders and the calendar invite.
Thank you so much. So from us all here at People Lab and Fathom XP and Everyday Resilience and Helena Clayton and our lovely guests and participants, particular shout out to Laura for joining the conversation. Thank you very, very much. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.